I do not endorse Satanism, but have always accredited it in connection with those who made the Beatles the immortal band that it became. At the top of the world's governing body, which oversees the banks, news media, and most public opinions, an ambitious organization labors to use their all-encompassing global dominance to create a new world order. I hope that the included spiritual aspects do not cloud the issues of how and why the globalists use Satanism. By systematic design, all such issues are so abhorrent in discussions of real-world affairs that rational people find them unthinkable. Until the public learns to let go of their fears of the subject, they keep their fear in power over them and will continue to energize that which they dread. Things we fear control us because we cannot intelligently deal with them. However absurd, Satanism infiltrated all of our major networks of media, commerce, politics, and religion. It collects and controls adherents nested in unsuspecting corporations, spreading its influence. It's well known that international bankers run the world's media, commerce, and politics. What is not readily understood is the extensiveness of their illuminated network that branches out in all directions throughout the whole world. The vast network is not about banking. That's just a funding source. That colossal network has always been about the power to control the masses and ultimately the entire world. Nearly everyone, regardless of their awareness of it, is in the network already through several lines of influence: banking, entertainment, government, and major corporations. Satanism is merely one of many long, thin threads. EMI is a British music company formed in March 1931. Making big war profits in World War II, they made radar equipment and guided missiles, then later branched into broadcasting equipment, television cameras, and computers. In November 1931, that company made studios for recording and later remastering music. These recording studios, which we Beatles made eminent, are located at Abbey Road in St John's Wood in the city of Westminster, a borough in the centre of Greater London. Work in the network was aided by EMI's retained military intelligence. Oscar Preuss, head of EMI's Parlophone Records from 1950 to 1955, had an assistant whom he trained under him who took over when Preuss retired. The new leader, George Martin, whose past oboe teacher was Jane Asher's mother, recorded classical and Baroque music, big hit plays, and some of the regional music from the British Isles. While the Beatles were performing in strip clubs over in Hamburg, Beatles folklore has it that their manager, Brian Epstein, convinced George Martin to consider recording them. Actually, George's superior ordered it. Critical of Pete's image and skill, George had him replaced. Even though George Harrison, following George Martin's order, had already hired a replacement, Ringo, who already had played a few times with the band before, George Martin hired a new drummer to help with their recording sessions. Ringo showed up, unaware of the redundancy. He got to help on the recording with tambourines, etc. Martin was ordered to make the Beatles huge, even though he felt the band lacked talent. He then ordered Brian to clean up their image to make them look presentable and innocent. With Martin's help, they would turn their little songs into big hits. He changed parts, added piano, networked with the media, and all else to make them marketable. He was eventually known as the fifth Beatle for doing so much, but was never a band member. Resisting getting cleaned up as well, when the Rolling Stones also got a recording contract, they each opted to pass themselves off as the Beatles' nasty rivals. It played perfectly into the hands of the secret committee of 300. As the snitch said, with the Beatles in their right hand and the Stones in their left, they would transform the whole world. The Beatles would be promoted as the good boys of rock, while our friends the Stones would be promoted as hellish demons. The idea that came from a few rungs higher up the influence ladder than George Martin was that each band would split the world at its own level to achieve the societal fragmentation and disintegration that's necessary to have an irreversible cultural revolution back to the cult of Dionysus, a god of wine and madness. Everyone can ignore all of that. The relevance here is that top-level social scientists, including Willis Harman, who have ties to those over the conglomerates who control the media, gave us an opportunity to change the world. They made a special priority of these two bands, sufficient to represent us to the world in a most powerful media light. The Beatles and Stones were distinct on our level of operation, but were used in concert by the social engineers for their global purposes. We did not receive their full detailed plan, but did have heavy doors open for us. As long as each band worked within their guidelines, that abruptly changed when I came along, everything played out perfectly. In the case of the Rolling Stones, they were essentially told to be evil devil worshippers, and that the more they could incite their audiences to destroy all of the Stones' venues, the greater would be their hold on the world. They did their psychotic best to make fans go insanely berserk. For instance, in the US, they got their audience so worked up into a frenzy, vandalizing the Ed Sullivan set, that he swore they could never come back. Given media support to publicise that endorsement, sales soared. John and George were especially close to the Stones. One day, when Mick was at EMI Studios, he overheard me talking to John and Ringo about some of Paul's assets. Mick became irritated with me. He told me that I'm in my obsession on his new album, that I'm obsessed with getting all of Paul's nicest belongings. Then he sang his line, "My obsession, your possessions, every piece that I can get." He said, "That's you, Bill, all about taking everything that was Paul's. You tell us over and over again that your actions are all for Paul and that he's better off without you taking his place, but I don't think so." Then he sang to us, "I don't mind if it's unkind and it's not my property, but I want it just to be mine, exclusively." He went on with other parts that also pointed at me. "How can you say that?" I said. "Paul wanted it this way, and I gave up everything and practically everyone to save this band. It didn't cost the band 1 cent, just Paul's family as heirs." Ringo said, "It's only fair, you know. The new man may take the fortune." We use Ringo's words on the montage of Paul's death clues of I Am the Walrus. Before the final verse, just after the second line of They Are the Eggmen, you can hear, "New man may take the fortune." You would have to listen for it to catch it. It's background chatter. I, the new man, am shown at that point in the movie. It was because Paul became a millionaire the year before that he was ripe to be offered, offering a nice reward for accepting him. To me, the job was not to preserve Beatlemania, but suddenly to be some great and wealthy superstar. It was a dream job for sure. I wanted the fame and fortune. For the sacrifice I made, I got his inheritance. I said to Mick, "John did not object to me getting it." "That's not the only one we have about you replacing Paul, Bill," Mick said. "We all talked it over when we wrote Something Happened to Me Yesterday." "Never call me Bill again," I said. "I gave up my whole life to be Paul. Tell him, John." "Even in jest," John said. "Never call him Bill." "Okay, Billy boy, I've told him." "Something happened to me yesterday," Mick began to sing to me tauntingly. "Something I can't speak of right away. He don't know if it's right or wrong. Maybe he should tell someone. He's not sure if it's against the law. Something very strange, I hear you say." "Very funny," I interrupted. "Is that on your album?" "Oh, you're talking in a most peculiar way," he sang on. Laughing, John inserted the words, "Not at all like the Paul we knew, most peculiar." "Very funny," I repeated. This was not the only time they combined against me. Everything else Mick sang to me then was a spontaneously impromptu version of the song "You Don't Know Just Where It's All Gone, You Don't Really Care at All, Now Billy is Just Not Sure What It Was, What's It Mean, What'd You Cause? You cannot say it's right or it's wrong, Billy. You can tell someone. Now you're unsure just what it was or if it's against the law. There's something more to pay for sins that you committed yesterday." Mick interrupted his own singing, stopping long enough to say, "Yesterday, that's Paul's song of you." I knew. His singing resumed again. "It's oh so trippy." He interrupted his singing again. I got that line from Donovan. "Shut up," I shouted. "Is that on your album? What will you tell the press when they ask you to explain it all?" Mick was getting personal with me, not merely writing about losing Paul. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll just tell them all to read Between the Buttons." Their Between the Buttons album, including those Paul songs, was the first album either band released after Paul died. Having those songs on the Stones album made us even bolder to include Paul's clues on my band's eagerly pursued Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album, which was released about 5 months later. On the Sgt. Pepper's cover, we acknowledge the Rolling Stones' awareness of us replacing Paul and include them for more clues. Paul, written in a hyacinth arrangement as Paul's bass guitar, aside from the word stereo added later, was the only word on the album's front cover, aside from Beatles, also in flowers on the ground since that band died with him, the name of the album, As If Our New Band, and on Shirley Temple's shirt, Welcome the Rolling Stones Good Guys, promoting our other half. It would have been impossible to keep it from them. They knew Paul too well. It affected them terribly. Not one of them was quite the same after it. They knew about the internment, but were not invited, the contracts, the transformation, and my new work as Paul. At first they were skeptical. They thought this gig would be too big for me, and nobody, until we released Sgt. Pepper's. Then they all confessed that I had nothing to worry about. I was a better Paul than expected, and getting better all the time. As hard as it was to believe, it blew them all away. It blew the whole world away. Sgt. Pepper's was far beyond every measure of any Beatles album that had gone before. It was far beyond anything any band had made before. The excellence of that album showed everyone that I was an exceptional replacement. Most Rolling Stones fans noticed their change too, but had no clue of what provoked it. How on earth could they possibly know? We didn't let the cat out of the bag for years yet. We loaded our records with clues for years before we finally helped the public understand them. No one seemed to see even the most obvious clues. Whenever Mick, Keith, or Brian saw me, they tested me, asking questions to see how far I could be Paul. They asked me about my childhood, relatives, houses, parents, cars, Jane, and jobs, everything they could think of. When they would ask me something above and beyond what I already knew, if the right answer did not pop into my head, I'd make up a new history that I often convinced them was right anyway. I became quick at making up good stories that they could not argue with. It was a game, really, and I was quite good at it. Having our great success with the Sgt. Pepper's album made my position in the band the most eminent. All was centered around Paul, but that inevitably included all of it revolving around me, if you know what I mean. We wrote about Paul's death, but I, the living Paul, called all the shots. Creating all the mystery, material, or power to drive the band up in excellence, my contract had opened new potentials and successes that drove the Stones crazy. They were astonished by my understanding of Paul's inner workings. When John and George told Brian Jones about some of my better lucid dreams of Paul and about how he had instructed me, Brian just about went crazy. He did not waste any time at all. He convinced all the rest of their band that they needed a muse from heaven or hell who could do for them what Paul was doing for the Beatles, through me. As we were finishing Sgt. Pepper's, the Stones were working on their Flowers album. Theirs was very obviously tied to ours, even their Paul art. Our cover had Beatles and Paul in flowers. On theirs, the entire band was shown as if they were flowers. As Brian told me, those flowers were their gift for Paul. It represented the flowers, which were merely themselves, which they sent to Paul's funeral. Making flowers a farewell gift for Paul, it contained goodbye songs to him. That album was a truly outstanding offering, released the same month as our funeral album, Sgt. Pepper's. Good songs were included on Flowers. I thought it was one of their better albums. By this time, it was second nature for Keith and Mick to mix lyrics and messages in the same fashion that we needed to do to be able to say it, all without anyone hearing it. They too created more songs with Paul in rich lyrics, lots of them. Each had its own story as well. But they were stronger songs from having his death on their minds. The Stones were close friends of Paul, who had all heard him complain about the dreams of his demise and replacement. When it happened, and the remains of Paul were buried, and I took over the position, it seriously spooked all of them. They were traumatized by it. However, without Paul belonging to their band, their substantial Paul enrichments had to be much more discreet. Here are some of the Jagger Richards lyrics from Flowers. See if you can adjust your thinking about each of these songs well enough to recognize who these two writers were thinking about, while also being aware of each song's official storylines. These first lines are from Ruby Tuesday. Officially, it's a love song of a girl not to be wed. I shall translate it. The new Paul would never say where he came from. Yesterday, the old Paul, don't matter if he's gone. While the sun is bright, when Paul was alive, or in the darkest night, when his life ended, no one knows the difference. No one can tell when one Paul comes and the other goes. Although no one knew, the Stones were an exception, being given all the news and being left out of nothing. They knew that I came and that Paul went. They sang Goodbye Ruby Tuesday. Later, John sang Stupid Bloody Tuesday, referring to that same awful Ruby Bloody Tuesday that John told them about, being the day he learned of Paul's death. And although Paul had died the Sunday before, his death did not become a reality to John until the tormenting telegram he received on Tuesday. An awareness of it hit John on Bloody Tuesday. Besides referring to Paul's blood, bloody is one of the favourite swear words of Great Britain. John used it as an expletive in describing that day to Mick. Every new day, myself and impersonators got his name. But who could hang a name on Paul? Absolutely no one. With every new day, every replacement of yesterday, there would be the change from the old Paul to the new. But when Paul evolves with every new day, still the Stones have their feelings for the old Paul. They say, still I'm gonna miss you, even though he would go on through this change from old Paul to new Paul. It's no slight against me that they still miss their friend. Don't question why Paul needs to be so free as a bird. Or in other words, don't ask us why old Paul must die. It's the only way to be. The only way to continue to exist as Paul was by substitution. I couldn't give him life, as I did, until he was set free. Creating a proxy Paul is the next best thing to being Paul. He had gone as far as he could. To gain it all, Paul had to be freed from mortality. He just can't be chained to a life where nothing's gained and nothing's lost at such a cost. Our urgency comes from Paul. There's no time to lose, I've heard Paul say, and sing. It was not until after he died that his cohorts took to heart the words, "Life is very short and there's no time." He got alarmed about it long before any of the others took it seriously. He sought assistance in preparing for his replacement. He pled for his mates to help him work it out to catch their dreams and his before they slipped away. If they didn't act quickly, it would be too late. Paul McCartney could not go on once the world mourned. It would be too late. Keeping it urgent, Paul was dying all the time. For several months, his dreams of dying tormented him, but did not drive the others. He feared that they would lose their dream of replacing him. Keith Richards masterfully penned, "Lose your dreams and you will lose your mind." The layered meaning is that Paul would be dying all the time in dreams, suffering for the rest of his life. The frequent death dreams would only stop by Paul's death in actuality. Paul would lose his mind, blow his mind out in a car, and only then stop dying all the time in his dreams. Ain't life unkind? Paul only stops dying when he's dead. Then it's goodbye to Ruby Tuesday. Ultimately, the most amazing thing about Ruby Tuesday is that it also works so well as a sad love song. Although as such, the phrase Ruby Tuesday makes no sense. It inspired us. The next song is Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby, Standing in the Shadow? Mick showed us how to read it by inserting the word brother for mother. It's about Brother Paul, who is standing over us in the shadows, the spirit world, and about me, another baby, appearing to take Paul's place. Until you can see this song as being about Paul standing in death's shadow, seeing me taking his girlfriend and his life, you cannot fully understand it. They intended to insult me when they sang, "The have-nots have tried to freeze you in ice." Mick felt that I, some poor have-not, overstepped my place. That was a common complaint from him and from others as well. They thought it unfair that I would save him for myself, preserving Paul for my own gain. Of course, my services helped others too. Out of Time is a Stones song that I recollect being about Paul losing control over me, but now denies it. I recall it anyway. I remember when they wrote it. As with their other songs, the lyrics had double meanings as well, but many had Paul meanings nonetheless. When they sang, "You don't know what's going on, you've been away for far too long," the discarded Paul was out of touch, my baby, my poor discarded baby. Paul was out of time and cast off. Being too old-fashioned now, he's obsolete, replaced by me, the new and improved Paul. He thought his dream of saving his name and fame through me was clever. He gave up his social whirl here in mortality and ran all of his interests from over there, but can't come back and be the first in line. Now he's out of time. It's too late, baby. His time is all used up. Now it's my hour. They all mourn that Paul is out of time now. They were not mocking him for it. Look up the lyrics if you don't know the song. Their "Ride On, Baby" was their own response to Paul's "I'm Looking Through You." When Paul sang it, he referred to himself, dead, replaced by me. Similarly, the Rolling Stones answered it, "A smile on your face but not in your eyes, you're looking through me, you don't feel it inside." Unless you knew that they understood Paul's song, you would never have recognized that one. Least favourite among the songs on that otherwise fine album was "Please Go Home." The message was that I did not have enough real affection for the prior Paul, that I should return to being William, and that I should not be collecting Paul's royalties for which I had not worked. It says, "In some early part of your days, you were told of the devious ways that you thought you could get without pay." Rude. Back to the bit about their envy of our Beatles' accomplishments, my constant connection to Paul intrigued them all. The Stones set out to get a muse of their own, while John, George and Ringo each tried desperately to feel after Paul individually. They tried about everything: prayers, meditations, seances and rituals. When I showed them that I could channel McCartney childhood details, desires and such, Mick claimed I got it from Satan, not Paul. The Beatles and Stones were all studying religiously with Satanist Kenneth Anger, and others since well before I became Paul. Both bands had entered into satanic compacts and made pledges. My heritage and Paul channeling drove them deeper. Since I already had Paul and a vast spiritual perspective, I lacked nothing to cut my own way through the jungle. Not needing what they offered, and seeing no point in echoing the words of others, I launched Paulism. Casually explaining all of this darkness after all these years feels good. I've kept these secrets long enough. That's the great thing about fiction, songs, and now this novel in particular. Truth can be unbridled in it far more than with non-fiction. The Rolling Stones turned from curiosity to pure satanic devotion before their next album, which they released in November 1967. Although Brian opposed Mick's eagerness to imitate us, Mick said his dark sauce inspired a new Sgt. Pepper sound. As ordered, they dedicated it to their new lord, christening their Pepper ripoff Their Satanic Majesty's Request. Here's another revelation for you all, speaking of Brian. The police and all the newspapers said he ended his own life by drowning himself in his pool. That's another cover-up story. Brian Jones, the Rolling Stones founder, was a brilliant, beautiful, exceptionally talented man. A tremendous entertainer. He played 66 instruments, some quite well, and helped write some of their songs. Finally, after ongoing friction in the band, he left it. He died less than a month later, in the summer of 1969. That was what motivated us to unlock our clues about Paul. The Beatles and the Stones' revolution were two sides of the same movement. We were better than they, but we're all brothers yoked together as one project. I was the Beatles' leader. Brian had been the Stones' leader. It was on the 3rd of July, less than an hour of hearing of his death, when we decided to reveal the clues. We would give understanding to the albums we had already sold. We wanted the whole world to know about it on the same day. We leaked the news to a Los Angeles musician on September the 11th, the 3rd anniversary of Paul's death, exactly 10 weeks after Brian died. 5 days later, the news reached Tim Harper, who published the story the next day in Times Delphic, the college paper at Drake University in Iowa. We expected hysteria, but did not get it. 24 days later, I called the lodge for an American contact. They referred me to Bill Hilling, a 32-degree Mason in Richmond, Indiana, who made some phone calls for us. The next day, one of his contacts called Russ Gibb, a disc jockey for WKNR-FM in Detroit. Gibb spent about an hour discussing the topic. After that October 12th broadcast, the news covered the globe. Everyone looked, but none saw Brian Jones's part in unstopping our fans' deaf ears and opening their blind eyes to hear and see that Paul had died. Then came the media pressure, more than we were ready for. What could we say? As in this telling book of fiction, we could speak plain truth in songs, but are forced to lie when talking to the press directly, just as I must disavow this book. As I think of Brian, I go through many musical memories, like when I invited him to play his little nifty alto saxophone in You Know My Name, back 2 years before he died. We toured with it some more without Brian there 2 months before he passed, and finally released it on the 6th of March 1970, some 9 months after his passing. We sold that comical song on the flip side of my Let It Be. Brian's death at that time became associated in my mind with the death of our band. However, that's another epiphany for you. Now I will tell you how he died. Frank Thorogood was swimming with Brian and said the drowning was an accident. Frank heard a voice say, "Brian is my sacrifice, he is mine, drown him." Frank obeyed on impulse. They were already in the pool. Frank could not stop himself. Satanism felt new to me one night in Hyde Park when Brian Jones and Kenneth Anger promoted Aleister Crowley, pictured second on Sgt. Pepper's, from a fresh perspective. Father Crowley, the father of modern Satanism, united with the Beatles, Stones, some of their best friends, and many others who had joined earlier in 1966. Crowley, an eminent Freemason in a few lodges, not regular Masonic bodies in the Anglo-American tradition, but similar, which at such high degrees include Satanism that is patterned after that used by the regular lodges. In regular Grand Lodges, oaths of secrecy prevent those possessing lower degrees from being aware of the blatant Satanism at the top. Don't imagine that blood oaths were objectionable in Crowley circles. They are commonplace. Owing to such secrecy, the profane, uninitiated people enter into Satanism without knowing where that path leads. That aspect works the same whether advancing by craft degrees through Freemasonry's ancient and primitive rites or through mere playful, independent experimentation driven by curiosity. The object for all, either way, is to get the person in far enough that he or she cannot get out. As Marianne Faithfull became sexually involved with members of the Rolling Stones and then fell in love with Mick Jagger, she naturally followed them into Satanism, particularly into Process Church. Letting that religion use her status support, she willingly became their celebrity poster girl. Before telling you about satanic murders that the Beatles became unwittingly connected to, I ought to explain another song by the Rolling Stones after our Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Rise. They were flabbergasted. They were aware of much of it, why we were still having a time with putting the whole thing together, but were still astounded by the brilliant final product. As a response to our title song, they wrote 2,000 Light Years from Home. It was to represent Paul floating away from this small planet, drifting off into space. They were saying that they each missed him as well. They had lonely hearts like all of us without Paul. The song starts with a line about the sun turning round. As with every revolution of the earth to the sun, it is another day. Our references to days are symbolic. Paul is yesterday because he is gone and because of his song. Keith represented Paul as Ruby Tuesday because of what John told Mick and Brian about the stupid Bloody Tuesday in which he found out that Paul died and finally saw the bloody picture. Not that Paul died on Tuesday. He didn't. It was the bloody miserable day that Brian informed John of it. Mick referred to me a new day. John and I both referred to me as just another day. Starting with the sun turning was a way to say that we went from yesterday to a new day. The sun turning round with graceful motion refers to the providence or grace that traded one day, Paul, for a new one, me, exactly as Paul had envisioned it. It starts with his crash. We're setting off with soft explosion. Just as Ruby Tuesday had a clear official meaning of an unmarried girl, so too does this song have an official meaning. This time, a spaceship takes off and flies away. In a closer look, it's more as a depiction of their own concepts of heaven or hell than of outer space. Paul goes to the netherworld of fiery oceans and freezing red deserts that turn to dark energy here in every part. It's the place of green sands. Wherever it may be, the repeated point is that as Paul drifts off into eternity, they and Paul are so very lonely. They are without him, and now he is without them. Answering our lonely hearts, they say they too are so very lonely without Paul. That song also copies our ideas by including a lot of backward recording. Although I do value their avant-garde expression, we did it first. Now you know why I, on Peppers, refer you to them for further death clues.